ultimately, people don't come to the hospital because they are well. They come because they need the help. Quality of life means a lot to people that are consistent and or have acute problems that come up. And the type of care that they need needs to be patient-centered care. So with these policies and procedures, we're being able to provide that patient-centered care as long as we're following what needs to be done in the proper chains of command with processing of instrumentation.
Rising above the buzz of ultrasonic cleaners and the clanking of stainless steel are the ideas and voices that are changing an industry. You're listening to the Beyond Clean podcast, the central nexus for the people, processes, and products that are improving our sterile processing world. Each week, we speak with frontline technicians, CEOs, engineers, and entrepreneurs with a common goal: to help you fight dirty, every instrument, every time. Whether you're tuning in for education or inspiration, we're glad you did. Now turn on those washers and turn up the volume. It's time to go beyond clean.
What's up, Clean Freaks? It's Hank Balch, and you're listening to Season 24 of Beyond Clean, the papers that make us awesome. And today we're going to be talking to Mila Miranda, the Assistant Manager of Sterile Processing at UC Davis Medical Center, on the topic of policies and procedures in SPD. We got them, you got them, we love them, sometimes we don't, but who's supposed to be writing them? Why are we writing them the way that we are? Can everyone understand them once they get written? And how do we keep them from going off the rails? We're going to be answering all those questions and more in just a few moments when we bring Mila up to the mic. So stay with us. Grab your favorite clean freak and pull them real close to your audio headset and AirPods, or just turn up the volume on your department computer. And we'll be right back with Mila Miranda.
From the studios of Healthcare HQ, you're listening to Beyond Clean, the global voice of sterile processing.
All right, joining us in studio now is Mila Miranda, the Assistant Manager for Sterile Processing at UC Davis Medical Center. And we're going to be talking today about sterile processing policies and procedures. So, Mila, welcome to the show. This is your first time on Beyond Clean, huh?
Yes, it is. Thank you, Hank. I really appreciate it. Something really fun and interesting I've always wanted to do and be able to give back things to people who might not know.
And, you know, Mila's also a member of our Beyond Clean advisory group. And so we're doing a lot of fun things through that group as well, Mila. And, you know, one of the conversations, obviously, that comes up within the advisory group and all across the industry these days is the policy and procedure question, especially when it's like accreditation time and, you know, you got the surveyors coming in. One of the things that's always at the top of their list is, what does your policy say for this? What is your procedure for that? And so this show, we're going to kind of crack open your head and learn a little bit about how you think about policies and procedures in SPD, and hopefully start some good conversations out there in the industry today. So you ready?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so let's kick it off here with the who question. We could ask how, we could ask what, but I want to start with the who. Who is responsible in the normal sterile processing department for creating these policies and procedures that we're talking about today?
So I've seen a few different ways that they have done it, where it's just the SPD manager and or director that works with perioperative services director in order to have them align with the operating room as well as CPU. In my current role now, it tends to be a little bit of everybody in leadership and education. We all kind of brainstorm and put everything together and put in our concerns, our good beefy material to use, as well as just trying to do research together and take different segments of things and create these nice, wonderful policies for our department.
Yeah, so you mentioned a couple of important words in your answer. So you said research, which I think, a lot of bells going off for that one. And you mentioned the word together. So let me just start before we get into those two words. What you didn't say is the clouds parted, the hand of God came down with these infallible policies and procedures just dropped in your department, and someone discovered them someday and said, hey, this is it. Somebody had to write these. And as somebody, to your point, hopefully they're researched and hopefully they are cross-functional or at least collaborative across the department if it's your leaders and your educators and your lead techs and even your frontline technicians. So can you speak to why that research piece is important, like what you said, but then also why it's important to do this as a team?
I think the research part is most important because everybody has a different interpretation of what English breakdown is and how to interpret the English language. Being that it is that way, I feel that not just professionally, but personally, that collaboratively we're able to really bounce ideas off of each other, as well as try to ask each other questions if we need to really ask does this make sense to you? A lot of people don't realize that it's not a laid out path. You really have to clear your path as to these policies and procedures that you need within your department.
Yeah, because what you're getting at is there's two people involved in every policy and procedure, at least, right? There's the person who writes it, and then there's the person who has to read it and understand it. And what you just said, I think, is a really important point. How is this perceived? Are we communicating it in our policy and procedure in a way that is as clear as possible for as many people as possible to understand what it is we're trying to get across in this particular policy? And it's very easy, to your point, if we've got preferences or if we like different style of writing or different languages and jargon out there that we like and we know exactly what it means, to just put all that in these policies and procedures and then forget, oh yeah, but we got Johnny and Susie and Jose on the other side of this that need to be able to read it and understand it. So that piece, I think, is a really important takeaway that you brought up, that, hey, there's users on the other end of this.
Yes. And also some of our users are English second language. So having it where they can understand it and they can speak to it and be able to do these processes are very helpful as well in our department.
Yeah. So great point on that, because it's hard enough, just basic English as a second language and just all the, general nuances of just surviving out there with regular English, not to mention the kind of clinical English or the medical terminology stuff that then you come into sterile processing. And there's all this other dictionary vocabulary words that can be confusing even for native English speakers like some of us as well. So, yeah, the challenge is real.
It is. And I think being supportive of that and looking at it in another person's view is helpful. I think, like you said, having lead techs to be able to validate what you're doing and walking through the processes before you solidify the policies and procedures really help outline where you might be deficient at. I know that a few of the educators and I, even though we'll put SOPs together and they reflect the policies, we make sure we walk through it before we really introduce it to other people. And that way each document supports itself as well as supports the staff.
Yeah. So, that comment that you just mentioned of the documents supporting themselves is one of those low-hanging fruit that we always bust departments on when we're coming in and doing assessments. Not, bust them like we're looking to bust them, but bust them as, hey, this is an opportunity for improvement, because what happens is we tend to write policies sometimes in a vacuum. And so we've got a policy on manual cleaning. And we're writing this policy on manual cleaning, completely forgetting that we also have a policy on automated cleaning that should integrate with the manual cleaning one. And we leave off the manual cleaning one, and it just doesn't fit together. Like sometimes there's inconsistencies between the two policies, Or, sometimes if we're updating policies, the manual cleaning one will be updated to 2021 standards, but the automated cleaning one will still be sitting back in 2017 standards, So your point of them being able to refer to each other internally across all your policies and be consistent, I think is huge for the sake of compliance, for sure.
Yes, it is. And it really can help you not just on the surveyor end, but also within the department of knowing that people are practicing what is expected and the standards that need to be followed for best practice for patient care.
So that's a great segue maybe to my next question here, which is the why behind policies. Talked about the who here, for the last couple of minutes, and there's a lot of who's, and they should be coming with a lot of research, a lot of collaboration, as we said. But here's the why, or I guess let me throw out the why. Why is it so important to sterile processing success to have good policies and procedures in place?
The patients. 100% the patients. Ultimately, whatever you do affects the outcome of a surgical procedure or office procedure for the patients. I myself was a patient that was injured because of insufficient cleaning of instrumentation. So that's when I started to scrub from full-time to part-time and then full-time in SPD, due to thinking of what could I do to make a difference so another patient wouldn't have to go through what I went through.
Wow. I didn't realize that. So you've got a personal story out of this that, connects real life with what it is we're talking about compliance wise.
Yes.
Wow. Yeah. So in going to this, this is a good reminder that we're not just talking about, it's like some audit or checklist. We're not just talking about passing accreditation. To your point, policies are about patient safety and about best practice. I think that was one of the other phrases that you used a moment ago. How do good policies and procedures impact patient safety? What is it that we're wanting these things to help our technicians do if they're written correctly?
So I would say with that is like the efficacy of your machines, testing that every day with proper cleaning and disinfection and or sterilization of instrumentation, ensuring the integrity of your packages is correct. All these little things can really snowball and create a really bad problem for a patient, whether it's contaminated items that reach the field to like a package being compromised and the patient having to cancel surgery and have surgery on another date. Ultimately, people don't come to the hospital because they are well. They come because they need the help. Quality of life means a lot to people that are consistent and or have acute problems that come up, and the type of care that they need needs to be patient-centered care. So with these policies and procedures, we're being able to provide that patient-centered care as long as we're following what needs to be done in the proper chains of command with processing of instrumentation.
Some of the examples you gave there, while they may seem small, that's a great highlight to the role of policies, right? It's not just the big things like, did you wash your hands? That's a pretty big overarching hand hygiene policy, right? But then even down to the small things, are you doing the regular and the required testing of your equipment? Are you checking and validating the integrity of your packaging? And every single one of these steps, while they may seem kind of commonplace to the experienced technician, all of these things are brand new to new technicians who have not learned the process and the protocol within sterile processing. So the only way to hardwire that, to your point, is through good, solid policies and procedures. But that kind of begs the question, and here's my next question for you is, what does, in your opinion, what makes or what defines a good policy in this context? What does it need to have to check all those boxes where we can look at a policy or procedure and say, yeah, that's a well-written policy?
I think the following of the standards that we have in guidelines, following the IFUs from the manufacturers, as well as having in-services with the manufacturers to ensure that not just what we're reading, but what we're physically doing is correct. And using those collaborative team members that you have and actually walking through the processes. Like I said, when you are making your policies, having your SOPs with that, and for your SOPs to reflect what your policies and procedures are, really outlines where you can actually like role play and do the task at hand, so to speak, right? And with those different experiences, you kind of see how your policy is reflecting good or bad, and where you can have room for improvement as a department as a whole.
Yeah, that's one of the frustrations that I'm sure will come up on the IFU part of this season. But, we hammer IFUs many times and say, whoever wrote this had no idea what it's like in the real world of sterile processing. Like, this thing's written for a laboratory, not the average sterile processing department. But the same can happen in your policies and procedures, to your statement, if they're not created and developed in collaboration with that frontline user, but also the practical feedback, right? We can write it down, but then what are we actually doing? How are we actually getting the job done? Is that aligning with the policy and procedure? And if it's not, it doesn't mean that the practice is improper or unsafe. It may mean the policy itself needs to be updated to reflect the current practice or the best workflow or the efficiency, as long as, to your other points, we're checking the regulatory boxes, we're referencing the latest updates to any industry guidelines or standards, and then we're aligning that again, with the practice of our frontline clinicians. I think that's a terrific way to address this. Maybe let's address the other side of the equation. So we've talked about the role of policies, what good policies should do, what they should look like. Give us a couple of examples about what bad policies could do to our departments, or maybe even how policies and procedures get off the rails and are sometimes unhelpful to the goal of sterile processing.
I think it could be on either end of the spectrum, with either being too vague and or just being too overly filled with information that kind of puts somebody not feeling like what I call kindergarten work, but that it's so minute to detail that it's almost a little unhelpful to use it as your outline to what you need to do in each of these policies. So a good example would be, I've walked into places where policies were so vague that it didn't even reference like AMI standards or AON standards and things like that, especially whenever we are in collaboration with working with the perioperative services and our services intertwine, and seeing that some of the policies that are in peri-op will affect us as sterile processing and what has to be done, and making sure that that policy reflects those standards from AON and AMI.
I can understand the temptation to be vague if you're going to want to leave, room for interpretation, if you will, or maybe room for some flexibility. But as you mentioned, you can't be so vague that it doesn't really give the user the information that they need to take the steps that we want them to take to be compliant or to be safe in whatever context that is, right? If it's manual cleaning of endoscopes, or if it's terminal cleaning the decontamination area, or if it's how we set the cycle or run the test in the autoclave. All of those things, do have some details that have to be put in there. To your other end of the spectrum that you mentioned, there has to be details, but do they have to be so specific and scripted that it feels like you can't do these steps without the 142-point checklist that now is in our policy for every single decision or workflow that we have to have in our departments? And I think that it is a great balance, and, probably the correct end of those spectrums, right? Somewhere in the middle is where we need to hit. What about the disconnect? And I wrote an article about this many years ago at this point, and this is more in reference to the AMI guidelines and how it's so common out there in the industry for, departments to have a copy of the AMI ST79, for instance, but it's locked away in the manager's office on a random bookshelf that has an inch worth of dust on it, so anybody walking in there can say, no one in this department has cracked open this book for years and years and years. Well, sometimes same thing can happen with our policies and procedures. Even if you've got a great collaborative work group together with your managers and directors and your educators, of all the work that goes into creating great documentation on these things. And yet, if you ask the random technician, hey, what's your policy on X? Or can you find your policy on X? Which is what a lot of our surveyors will do. They kind of give you this blank stare and say, well, it's somewhere on the intranet. It's somewhere on our policy thing somewhere, but they can't access it. They can't find it. And it's clear if they do find it that they haven't read it for many years. So how do we bridge that gap of access versus true head knowledge and true hand knowledge of these policies and procedures?
I think not just having access to the internet and understanding where the policies are for the department and how to define and find them in the search boxes on those internet is having a hard copy within the department. And part of new staff members' orientation is to review that. So at least there's touch base with it. And then also when they're going through their competencies, also assist with having not just the SOP, but your policy and procedure that goes hand in hand with it. It tends to not just give the correct information, but then that they're aware and they know where to find those resources. As well as the AAMI book at other facilities, I have had the AAMI different standards on the SPM. So we were able to actually just access them and pull up different things that we needed in order to be able to speak to different standards that the surveyors asked about.
Yeah, I love that integrating into the tracking system concept. I think that there's so many applicabilities. Like the past number of years, we've been integrating IFUs more and more to the tracking systems. But yeah, even our policies and procedures, that's a great place to be putting them to give our frontline technicians greater access and more regular exposure to these. Because some departments have a whole library of different policies and procedures for any number of things. And even if you're doing them on an annual basis through your competencies, as you mentioned, which is another great idea, that's still a lot to consume. And if you got a lot of people, I know because I've been on the leadership side, we're trying to get you through those annual competencies pretty quick. And, anytime that you can just kind of sit down and say, okay, my policies for sterile storage. How many are there? What are the highlights? What are the nuances, the random things that could be easy to forget? And constantly finding creative ways to do that throughout the life of your department, throughout that rolling 12 months. I think that's a best practice approach to try to get these policies and procedures out of the database and into the hearts and minds. So, well, Mila, you're going to be surprised, but our time has flown by here. I want to give you the last word, though, for policies and procedures. Obviously, you've been in the industry for a number of years. You're in the leadership position now. What other advice or what other takeaways, if you were listening to this show on the other end, on the audience side, what would you want to know? Or what kind of encouragement would you want to get on this topic, either for leaders or for new technicians or maybe stressed out about not knowing their policies and procedures? What would you say to them?
Don't be scared to ask. Ask any kind of questions that you feel. If you don't think it's right, then it more than likely is not right. Keep your surgical conscience in the back of your mind and make sure you listen to it.
Surgical conscience. I love that. I call it the clinical conscience, but that's exactly what it is because we have got to keep that alive. The last thing on earth that we want is sterile processing technicians or anyone in healthcare having their conscience kind of burned over and become cold. And then they're just willing to let things go that they know they should have asked a question about or they should have stopped the line. So that is a great way to wrap this episode. Mila, thank you so much for your time. And we look forward to talking to you again soon.
Thank you. Have a great day. Bye-bye.
All right, that was Mila Miranda on season 24 of The Papers That Make Us Awesome, talking about policies and procedures in sterile processing. And we covered a lot of ground, but you're probably sitting there thinking, hey, there's a lot more else to say about policies and procedures. And you're right. We're going to be talking a little bit more about some topics that would have come up if we would have had more time to talk to Mila today in the rest of the season, including competencies, department documentation, annual evaluations, and IFUs in SPD. So hopefully we're going to check off a few more of those boxes and topics, because we all know policies and procedures are not little isolated conversations that only touch the filing cabinet or the database that we store them in, but they literally touch everything that we're doing in SPD, because if we're doing it, there should be a policy around it and a procedure to help us to do it correctly. But I think Mila did a terrific job giving us a high-level overview and some great takeaways on the spectrum of good policies and procedures, all the way to policies and procedures that are probably too vague, or on the other side, a little too descriptive or proscriptive, that don't leave enough room for the critical thinking that has to go in day to day in sterile processing. So we'd love to hear from you if you've got your own feedback on what makes good policies and procedures in sterile processing, or any other question that you have for our team or for Mila. You can send us an email at info@beyondclean.net. And until we talk to you again next time, keep fighting dirty.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Beyond Clean. As a reminder, you can help support us by subscribing to Beyond Clean on your favorite podcast app, or by downloading the smartphone app on iPhone or Android. Simply search for Beyond Clean in the App Store or Google Play. The best thing about downloading the smartphone app is that you can access bonus content for certain episodes and view episodes in certain categories, like articles on the go and vendor spotlights. Are you following us on LinkedIn or Facebook yet? If you are and you love an episode or post, then let your social network know about it. Like, comment, or share our posts along with your thoughts and keep the conversation going. If you have any topics or guests that you would like to recommend for a future episode, just send us an email to info@beyondclean.net. We look forward to hearing from you.